Yeah.
See you later. Yeah, no. Okay, I'm going to set up the frame that will.
Hi, and welcome back to Behind the Scenes at the Rural Education Symposium. I'm Angela Barron, and with me is a familiar face, our Education Minister, Gord Dirks, and thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it.
Well, it's great to be here. Wonderful event.
Now, you were up front and you spoke a little bit about some of the priorities for the Alberta government in education. Maybe just briefly tell us a little bit about some of those priorities.
Well, you know, a huge priority is ensuring that we have the right infrastructure in place for the future. We have aging infrastructure, we have student enrollment pressures, and we actually have about 230 school projects underway at present. New school builds, modernizations, replacements, and even though we're in challenging fiscal times, we're committed to do everything we can to ensure that we get those projects finished and done so that we can add the spaces and keep the school infrastructure that we need for Alberta into the 21st century.
Now, I wouldn't be loved too much if I didn't ask this question. I know you've heard it from school boards. They're concerned. We know that the budgets are going to be tight, but we do know that education is a priority for this government. So I guess, is there anything that you can say as far as, you know, what are we to expect a little bit, I guess, as far as this budget coming?
Yeah. Well, we are in very straitened fiscal times. We have a $7 billion plus deficit that we're facing for next year. And so we're all going to have to do our part. We're going to have to raise revenue. We're going to have to restrain expenditures. We may have to run deficits for a couple of years using the contingency fund until we can get ourselves in a better fiscal framework situation going forward. So it will be a challenge for education and for school boards. We're going to have to do our part. As Minister of Education, my role is to advocate for education. And I've been telling people everywhere that I've been doing that. I continue to do that, and we'll just have to see where the budget airplane lands when the budget comes down.
Now, this is the Rural Education Symposium, and as much as education is important across this province, it's so hard because it's not a one-size-fits-all framework. I mean, we see growing enrollment in the urban centers, and we see declining enrollment in rural. I mean, it must make things very difficult for government when you're trying to look at how do you make this budget work for everyone.
Yeah. That is a great challenge. We have many different unique circumstances. We even have circumstances in some areas in rural Alberta where the student populations are growing and others where they're declining. And so tremendous unique circumstances. We want to try and do everything we can to ensure that we're providing an equitable, accessible environment for students, that we're keeping our rural communities as vibrant and healthy as we can. We know that schools are a key factor in keeping communities healthy and vibrant. And so it's really good to have an event like this because the big questions about rural education and rural communities are being asked. How do you sustain small schools in creative ways in a time like this, as opposed to just automatically assuming, well, the school's only got 50 or 60 children, so we're going to have to close it. Are there creative ways that we can sustain education and keep communities healthy in rural Alberta going forward? That's something we all ought to be concerned about.
And we do talk about partnerships in rural. So, you know, is the same thing happening in government? Are you looking at, you know, working with other ministries in the rural context to have that sustainable future?
Yes, those kinds of partnerships are very important. Not only out in rural Alberta, but right in the government itself. Individual departments need to talk to one another. I was just having some really good conversations a couple of days ago with the Minister of Agriculture, talking about how our revised curriculum here in Alberta in the future needs to recognize the reality of agriculture in rural Alberta. So we do need to talk with one another, both in government and outside of government.
Well, thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for answering a few extra questions for us. We really appreciate it. And for those of you who are watching through the webcasting, we do have some fabulous entertainment coming up next with students from right here in the Canmore area. So stay tuned.
All right.